I'm Meg, I'm the editor at Seamwork, and I'm back with another sewing lab where I will do a little sewing experiment so that you don't have to worry about trying this and wasting your fabric. And today I want to answer a burning question: do you really have to stay stitch your garments? It's an extra step before you start sewing. It's a little bit of a bummer. What happens if you don't stay stitch? Keep watching and I will show you what I find out. So what is stay stitching? Stay stitching is a line of straight stitches sewn along a single layer of fabric inside the seam allowance on a curve. So for example, your pattern may instruct you to stay stitch along the neckline, the armholes, on facing pieces, anywhere that you'll find a curve. These stitches won't be visible when you've finished sewing your garment. So if you won't see stay stitching on your final garment, why do you need it? Stay stitching's job is to maintain the integrity of your curves. Anytime you cut a curve on a piece of fabric, like in a neckline or an armhole, you're cutting closer to the bias grain of the fabric. And you might know that the bias is the stretchiest part of the fabric. This means that your fabric is more likely to stretch and distort as you're working with it. So if you skip stay stitching, what might happen is that as you are working with this curve on your pattern, it might stretch. So let's say you need to attach a collar to this neckline. If this neckline stretches out while you're sewing the bodice of your garment, by the time you go to attach the collar, the pieces won't match. Your neckline will be longer than your collar pattern piece. The same thing can happen at sleeves. You may need to end up doing extra gathering or easing of your sleeves because your armholes have totally stretched out. It's going to distort the way that the final garment lays on your body. So what I'm going to do is sew a couple examples of a stay stitch neckline and a couple examples that don't have stay stitching, and we will stretch them and move the fabric and kind of see how it behaves. That way we will find out just how important stay stitching is. All right, so while I sew these samples, I figured I could just show you how to stay stitch. So when you stay stitch, all you're going to do is use a straight stitch. You can shorten the length of your stitch if you want to create a stronger hold, but it's not necessary. And the standard is to sew about 1/8 of an inch away from the sewing line. So if your seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch, for example, then stitch about 1/2 an inch away from the raw edge of your fabric. Some people do like to stay stitch directly on the stitching line, which is totally fine. You do what you need to do. Another tip when stay stitching is to start on either end of the curve and meet in the middle. This will prevent distortion while you're stay stitching. So for example, on a neckline, you could stitch from the left shoulder seam all the way around the neck to the middle and stop, then flip over your fabric and start at the right shoulder seam and stitch all the way down to the middle where you just stopped your previous stitches. That will make sure that you maintain this beautiful curve. And that's it, that's how you stay stitch. So it's really just a time suck. It's not hard, it's not difficult, it just takes more time. Let's take a look at what happens when you stretch the neckline that has been stay stitched. As you can see, the thread provides resistance. It won't let me stretch it all the way. And if it does stretch, it bounces back. It's not distorting the grain of the fabric. I would feel totally confident attaching a collar, doing the burrito method, or attaching binding to the stay stitched neckline. Now let's take a look at what happens to a neckline that is not stay stitched. You can see right away that I am able to stretch this much more than the stay stitched version. You can see that the fabric is kind of stretching and growing and that the grain is actually getting distorted. I would not want to sew a collar to this neckline. I don't think that the pieces would match up and it would be really frustrating. So that is where stay stitching can really save your project. As far as exactly when to stay stitch, always if your pattern recommends it. Your pattern maker has your back. They're going to pay attention to those curves to make sure that you reinforce them as you're constructing your garment. You can stay stitch any kind of fabric. It could be wovens, it could be knits. Anytime you don't want your fabric to stretch out while you're working with it, just sew a line of stay stitching. Now you might be thinking, even after seeing all of this, but Meg, I don't stretch my fabric when I sew. And that might be true, but you don't know what's going on under your feed dogs. Your machine might be tugging and pulling at your fabric, and you won't be able to see what's going on until you are finished and your pattern pieces do not match. So, official recommendation from this experiment is that you don't skip stay stitching. You'll really thank yourself later. Your garment will fit so much better and it'll be so much more fun to sew. If you don't believe me, just sew up a swatch yourself. Stretch it, see what it feels like with your hands, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. I hope you enjoyed this experiment. If you have requests for another experiment you'd like me to do, just leave a comment down below and I'm happy to test it out for you. Otherwise, happy sewing and happy stay stitching.